It's 1982. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher are in power. There was a war over the Falklands. Physical and Eye of the Tiger are top of the charts. And more importantly, for our discussion today, the movie E.T., directed by Steven Spielberg, was released that summer. It's Christmas the same year. You're opening your presents. And you come across the one thing you've been waiting for. It's E.T. for your Atari 2600. You open the box and slam the cartridge in from sheer excitement, and you're greeted with this. This is the story of the 1983 video game crash, and whether something like this could happen again today. In 1977, Atari released their home console, the Atari Video Computer System, also known as the Atari 2600. This followed on from their earlier success with the release of their home Pong console units, which allowed people to play the hit game Pong on their home TV. The key difference with the 2600 was its capability to switch games through its own cartridge system, which was first used on the Fairchild Channel F just a year before. People could now have a whole selection of games available to them, rather than just the one pre-installed on their system, with Atari releasing 9 games to accompany the launch of the 2600. Titles such as Combat, Air-Sea Battle, and Street Racer. This was the beginning of not only the second generation of gaming, but also a bigger shift from playing games in the arcade to now being able to play almost all the games you would expect to see in the arcade at home. By 1979, Atari would have sold over 1.5 million consoles, and the number of games available would be more than triple to 32. However, alongside this growth, there was a rift forming at the development level. Since its release, all games for the 2600 were produced in-house by Atari themselves, and one developer in particular had noticed something quite telling. David Crane, one of the developers at Atari, known for his work on titles such as Outlaw and Canyon Bomber, had noticed that he, alongside 3 other developers out of a total 35, was responsible for producing games that had accounted for nearly 60% of Atari's sales. Crane alone had brought in over $20 million for the company, and was dissatisfied that he was only receiving a salary of $20,000. Crane, alongside his 3 fellow developers, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead, became vocal about the lack of recognition within the company, and slowly became known as the Gang of Four. The group decided to confront the CEO of Atari, Ray Kassar, in May 1979 to demand that the company treat developers as record labels treated musicians, with royalties and their names on the game boxes. Kaplan, who called the other 3 the best designers for the 2600 in the world, recalled that Kassar dismissed the demands and claimed that anybody can do a cartridge. Shortly after this confrontation, the 4 decided to leave Atari and create something new. However, they weren't sure how to do it. The concept of a third-party game developer didn't exist. All software for consoles at this time was produced in-house by the manufacturers of the system, not just at Atari, but at companies in the same market, such as Mattel and Magnavox. By August 1979, Crane and Miller had left Atari, with Whitehead joining them shortly after. Kaplan would join in December of the same year. The company was initially called Computer Arts Inc., until Jim Levy, their attorney and acting CEO, suggested combining Active and Television into Activision, which was formally founded on October 1st, 1979. Initially, Activision began working out of Crane's garage in the latter half of 1979, with each programmer developing their own game that was planned for release in mid-1980. With the Four's knowledge of the Atari 2600, they were able to make their own games look visually distinct from Atari-produced games. To further distance themselves from Atari, Activision's boxes were brightly coloured and featured an in-game screenshot on the back cover. Instruction manuals for the games also devoted at least 1 page to credit the developer. In response to the obvious dent left in their development team, Atari began the offensive. They tried to tarnish Activision's reputation by using the industry press at CES to label those who took trade secrets as evil, terrible people, according to Crane. Atari then later threatened to refuse to sell Atari games to retailers who also stocked Activision titles. By the end of 1980, the offensive coalesced into a formal lawsuit against Activision, claiming that the Four had stolen secrets and violated their non-disclosure agreements.
They tried all these monopolistic practices, and it was stupid because we helped make their console the de facto standard for a decade because we were supporting it, and the next group supported it. They were selling more consoles because of our support, but they couldn't see it that way. We were the best thing that could have happened to Atari, but they didn't think so at the time.
The court process was long and drawn out, all the while Activision continued to release hits such as Kaboom and Pitfall. Then, in early 1982, Atari decided to settle out of court. The two came to an agreement that Activision could continue operating in exchange for paying a licensing fee for their games, effectively legitimizing third-party video game developers as a business model. From this settlement, there was an explosion of third-party developers onto the video game scene. Companies such as Apollo, iMagic, Starpath, and M Network began developing and releasing titles for the Atari 2600. The same year, Activision was legitimized, and what would follow would ultimately be their downfall. Throughout the rise of Activision and other third-party developers, Atari would have to increase production of their own in-house games in order to outlast their competition. Atari's arcade division was finding success with their latest releases, Lunar Lander and Asteroids, which, alongside Taito's Space Invaders, helped usher in the golden age of the arcades. In order to supplement the 2600 sales, Kazaa sought to secure the rights to Space Invaders for the console. Once the rights were signed over, Rick Maurer was able to complete the conversion and the game was released in March of 1980. The game became an instant success and made Atari an estimated $100 million, as well as increased sales of the 2600. After this success, it set in motion the roadmap for future game releases for the 2600 under Kazaa, where they would seek out more licensed arcade conversions and tie-in media. Under this guidance, Atari would find itself releasing more games for the 2600 of seemingly diminishing quality. The first evidence of this was the release of Pac-Man in March 1982. After once again securing the rights for the game from Namco, Atari believed it would be a success on the same level as Space Invaders. However, very few resources were allocated to its development, entrusting development solely to Todd Fire. While Fire was able to get a version of Pac-Man working on the 2600, the resulting game was critically panned for many technical issues, such as the flickering of on-screen characters. While the game would continue to become the best-selling title for the 2600, it would also steer consumers to be more cautious when it comes to purchasing brand new games in the future. Regardless of consumer confidence in their products, Atari would continue pushing further in this direction, securing the rights to Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T. the same year. The license for E.T. alone is estimated to have cost Atari between $20 to $25 million. E.T. was set to be Atari's big Christmas hit, with a release date scheduled for December 1982. However, the issue with this scheduling was that they had the developer Howard Scott Warshaw, who had only just recently finished his work on Raiders of the Lost Ark, set to be the lead developer of E.T. In Atari's typical development cycle, games would be made over a 6-month period. With this scheduling in place, Warshaw would only have 5 weeks to complete E.T.
It was an extremely intense 5 weeks. Virtually nothing else existed in my life other than the game. I had a development system moved into my home. So wherever I am, I'm never more than a minute from being able to get to a keyboard and start putting the code in that I need to put in. That 5 weeks was the hardest 5 weeks I ever worked in my life.
Regardless of the amount of effort put in by Warshaw, when the game was released for the holidays of 1982, it became known as one of the worst games ever made. While the game sold 2.6 million copies that year, the following year would see an influx of returns, making it a financial failure. E.T. was the straw that broke the consumer confidence in home video games. Throughout the early 80s, consumers were getting tired of the increasingly diminishing quality being put out by Atari and other third-party developers. The focus on quantity and not quality had soured the entire market. From 1982, after establishing third-party development as a legitimate business, there was an explosion of games for the 2600, from 67 in 1981 to 400 in 1983. Because of this, Atari reported in its first quarter of 1983 an operating loss of $45 million, compared to an operating profit of $100 million in the same quarter of the previous year. Atari had an excess of unsold cartridges, and independent retailers were no longer stocking Atari products, or were put out of business entirely because of the returns and unsold stock. Eventually, Ray Kassar would resign as CEO in July 1983 over the mounting financial troubles at Atari, and the following quarter would see a further loss of nearly $310 million. The company would discreetly bury around 700,000 units of unsold stock in a landfill in New Mexico in September 1983. Atari's financial troubles of that year would reverberate throughout the entire video game industry. Consumer confidence was the lowest it had ever been. Retailers became wary of selling video games in general, and the rising popularity of home computers drove sales away from video game consoles. Retailers would heavily discount consoles and games to make way for new titles, which effectively wiped out many of the new companies that had sprung up in 1982 following Activision's lead. The arcades were also slowly becoming a drain on any potential income as interest slowly dried up. It wouldn't be until the introduction of Nintendo's entertainment system the same year that interest in home consoles would again increase. But by that point, Atari would have significantly reduced in size and would never truly make a resurgence to the position it once held. When we move forward 30 years, the gaming market has changed significantly since its infancy in the late 70s and early 80s. In 1982, the video game market was estimated to be worth $42 billion. Today, that industry is worth $242 billion. Technology has come a long way in those years, as well as the maturity of the industry. There was a long stretch of time where games that were coming out were generally well received and praised for their advancements in technology and storytelling. However, you could argue that we're heading for a similar trajectory as we were in the early days of video games. From the early 2000s, there was a shift in game design, and technological advances allowed developers to implement seemingly more money-making mechanics and cost-saving measures. Patches and updates could be implemented after the release of the game thanks to the internet, as well as the implementation of microtransactions. Microtransactions first appeared around the 90s, but not in the way that we have them now. It's believed one of the first true implementations was in the arcade title Double Dragon 3, where players could insert coins into the arcade machines to purchase upgrades, power-ups, health, and weapons, among other items. This system quickly gained popularity, particularly in South Korea. Soon, with the rise of the MMO genre and online multiplayer games, microtransactions would slowly enter the marketplace more commonly. Soon we would see microtransactions make their way into bigger AAA titles. The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion was released in March 2006 by Bethesda Softworks, and in April of the same year, Bethesda began releasing small downloadable packages of content from their website and over Xbox Live Marketplace. While many of these packages weren't popular, such as the infamous Horse Armor package, it would set the precedent that it could be done, and there's potential for this to grow. Throughout the late 2000s and early 2010s, we would see a rise in microtransactions and delivering content after the game was released, and not necessarily in a complete state. Titles such as EA's FIFA 09 would introduce Ultimate Team, an almost solely microtransaction-focused system where players could build teams of football players using coins purchased through the online systems. While players could earn coins slowly in the game, many would find purchasing to be much easier and quicker. Even the rise of the mobile gaming market would increase predatory game mechanics used by developers. Mobile games allow developers to reach out to the casual audience, those who wouldn't normally play games on a console or computer, but just needed something to kill time on the daily commute. The problem with this, however, wasn't expanding the market to more people for the consumer's benefit. It was to take advantage of an audience that was more inclined to spend a little money here and there to advance their gameplay and maybe unlock certain items. Games like Clash of Clans and the mobile strategy genre were the worst for this implementation of microtransactions. We would begin to see many more games come out during this period in increasingly unfinished states as well, with the sole intention of releasing them and fixing them afterwards. Games such as No Man's Sky, Fallout 76, Cyberpunk 2077, and many more would showcase that the industry was somehow becoming more accepting of titles in this state. So with the industry geared almost back to quantity, not quality, we've seen a slew of games, even in the last 2 years, come out in awful states. When we compare our current situation to the market just before the crash of '83, you wouldn't be hard-pressed to find similarities. Games coming from top developers in almost unplayable states, market oversaturation from the complete excess of games to choose from, hyped up games from franchises we recognize and then underdeliver. The consumer is being taken advantage of. So with all this in mind, are we really heading for another crash just like in 1983? In my own personal opinion, I don't think we are. Yes, the market in recent years has taken a downturn in quality, however I think there are brand new concepts that weren't around in 1983 to avert that disaster. First is the maturity of the industry. The industry has evolved so much since the 80s, and it's no longer a niche market. Now, gaming is bigger than movies and music combined, and because of this, the industry is so diverse and expansive compared to what it was. There's an area for almost anyone to fit in. So even if you don't like a certain genre or a particular platform, there are so many to choose from that it allows a wider audience to take an interest. When you compare that to how it was during the crash, the primary player in the video game market was Atari, as it was by far one of the largest companies in the industry. That means when it made a mistake, that mistake would reverberate throughout the entire market. And this plays into another key aspect of the industry today, its global presence. Gaming has become a cultural phenomenon, a global entity, meaning you have more stability and resilience to changes in a particular market. During the crash of '83, the European and Japanese markets fared a lot better due to the difference in interests, with Europe focused more on home computers than consoles, and Japan with its own homegrown companies, most notably Nintendo, which would eventually sweep through the US in the fallout of the crash. Alongside all this, there are new factors that would alter the scale of any kind of crash today: the rise of independent developers and digital distribution. While many AAA developers are slipping in quality and increasing their aggressive microtransaction structure, indie developers are producing games with obvious signs of passion and creativity. So while AAA studios may begin to suffer, the indie scene has been growing and growing, allowing more passionate developers to release not only fun and interesting games, but also games that just work without the need of microtransactions. And this growth wouldn't have been possible without the introduction of digital distribution platforms such as Steam and GOG. Instead of requiring warehouse space and production of discs or cartridges, indie developers could feasibly make and market their own products to the same level of audience as major developers. While independent studios did exist later into the 80s, it was considerably harder to have their games made, marketed, and produced on a large enough scale. The internet has made it so almost anyone with an idea can learn to make it a reality and then distribute their game freely without a publisher. So while a whole market crash of video games is something I don't see happening anytime soon, I do see a shifting interest away from the diminishing quality of AAA developers and more focus on the independent studios pushing out more creative and accessible games. We've already seen that the major developers are suffering from the bloat that is the over-corporatization of the industry. Ubisoft, for example, is suffering massively from financial problems, and yet their continuation of pushing out more and more Assassin's Creed titles, rather than investing in newer and more exciting ideas, is what's driving the customers away and their company further into trouble. Companies now rely on metrics. How can we keep the player playing? How long do they spend on each session? How can we keep them hooked with mechanics to push more microtransactions, rather than just creating engaging and creative stories and gameplay, which is what a lot of the existing player base wants. It's not the consumer who should be worried about the shifting interests of the market or a potential crash. It's the top developers who continue to refuse to change with the market and what their audience actually wants. This attitude will continue to push those who want to get into gaming away and push existing customers and players to the independent studios that care about what they're publishing. But what do you think? Do you think we're heading for a wider scale crash anytime soon? How do you feel about the top developers who refuse to change? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and want to see more, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any future videos. Don't forget to drop this video a like as well. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.